I can't believe I wrote that in my 20s. The new portfolio is you are the portfolio. Why do we not do that? Design it where you enjoy the work. And if you don't like writing books, don't write books. If you do, then write books. If you like filming courses, film courses. If you don't film courses. I used to do stuff like because that's what everybody said I should do, not because of what I want to do. Now I do it because I love doing it. I got into finance in June of 1998, and I mean, I just made mistakes right out the gate by the advice I was speaking out against in Killing Sacred Cows. And it wasn't just that advice harmed me because I had bought into these philosophies. I was now in the financial space telling other people about these philosophies that were including friends and family and the parents of my friends. And so when the year 2000 came and the market started to go down, my real education began. But I had to, like, as a young, arrogant kid, say, I don't know what I'm doing just because I was a good salesman, and have everybody move their money out of the market while I went and figured things out. And I just went on this path with the thought process. I don't care who's right, I just care what's right. And that includes myself. So if I have a belief that isn't accurate, I need to let it go and not be defensive about it. And if I am defensive, it's because it's probably a trigger because I've made a mistake and I just need to own up to it. So being willing to own up to those mistakes and then just ferociously for 26 months, I was flying somewhere every month, interviewing the brightest minds I could, going to events I wasn't even qualified to be in, but I found a way in to really navigate what was happening. And so Killing Sacred Cows became a book that I was tired of hearing people say, I wish I would have known this 20 years ago. And first off, I was like 27 when I wrote that. So I'm like, well, 20 years ago, I was 7 years old, so I couldn't have helped you at all with this. So I just got really frustrated with that. And look, I was first thinking about writing Killing Sacred Cows because I thought this will make me seem cool and this will be good for marketing. And I pissed around for 2 years doing nothing with it because there wasn't a purpose to it. What really happened is my business partners died in a plane crash, and we had talked about doing a book together because these guys were with me in challenging the status quo and unbundling what was going on in finance. And we had this like intellectual property partnership. And I remember the day that we just dissected 401ks, and it was like, I thought they were the best thing in the world. And if they were, by the way, if I had a 401k practice where I sold 401ks, as an advisor, you get paid on that every year, whether people make money or not. And you can sell that book of business for 12 to 15 times what your revenue is from it. So, so it's like, it would have been so easy and profitable. The problem is it isn't what it appears to be. So I was like, how are people going to figure this out when at that time no one else was talking about it? So that's where Killing Sacred Cows came from. And there's really three concepts that I thought were revolutionary. One is the first chapter, the finite pie, that if you're in scarcity, nothing else matters and you'll destroy wealth. Number two was avoid debt like the plague, and I said nobody knows what debt actually is. It's misidentified. And number three, the myth of self-insurance. Most people have the most expensive insurance possible with their own dollars, and they don't insure the catastrophic, and then they do insure the inconsequential, so they're not actually transferring risk, they're just paying for inefficient money. And then the other three factors were high risk equals high return. It takes money to make money and you're in it for the long haul. I was saying that those are the three main tenets that confiscate wealth, but people believe and say far too often, and that's what the accumulation model is built on. So, dude, I can't believe I wrote that in my 20s. I was like, because sometimes I think I'm having these epiphanies, and it's still in Killing Sacred Cows. It's just me remembering some of these thoughts. I feel like in the new book, Money Unmasked, the value index is the first time I've been able to put people in a place to feel what it's like to make a choice from abundance versus read writing about abundance. It's that kind of exercise of what happens when we add zeros to the end of numbers and where our focus starts to change, and then going back and reverse engineering and saying, at what point did we flip to focus on others and not just ourselves? Where do we think about solving problems and serving others and adding value versus selfishly just taking what we can and holding on to it because we're afraid we don't have enough? It is tough because a lot of us came from families that were blue collar workers, or from assembly lines, or from income uncertainty, and ultimately that can pass down like folklore to other generations. And I had to overcome that. I still have some remnants of it. It's not like I wrote the book and then I was just enlightened. I wrote the book and it was like, let's test you on this. Is this really, I was like, oh yeah, that's what that means. And I've developed some compassion over the years because of it too. I have 4 shadow personas. the miser that plays a game called preservation. They typically end up with funds that they won't spend because they're addicted to holding on to what they've got. They're transactional in nature. They think about cost cutting, elimination, deferring, delaying, reducing is kind of their mantra. I came from a family like this, putting cash in coffee cans, putting it in the cellar, knowing where the cheapest gas is, not buying something that they might want because they don't know if they're going to have enough money. And it's not really, they don't think about investments as often. The miser thinks a lot more about just cost cutting as their primary function. The conservative, a fiscal conservative, not a political conservative, is someone playing a game called accumulation. And they end up with funds that they can't spend because they're afraid they're never going to have enough. And so they are worried more about diversified portfolios, and they are more worried about, investing money into retirement plans, usually at the expense of today. They delay gratification and enjoyment for far too long that it becomes almost habitual. And so that's the difference between a conservative and a miser. Conservative still will be mindful and want to cut expenses, but they will overemphasize the investing and diversifying, and they don't want to take risk, but they unintentionally do because most of what they read about and learn about is very risky. But they think because they own more of it, somehow it's less risky. Meaning, oh, if I have a mutual fund that's got more than one stock, so I've diversified. Well, maybe, maybe not. What's the sector? Do you understand what the stocks are? Do you even know who the fund manager is? When will you benefit from it? What are the fees? How do you protect your downside? These are questions a lot of times they haven't asked because they love to read, but they read the books you talked about early on, like the Dave Ramsey books that are neglectful when it comes to the market, but emphasize for the miser what to do to budget, right? So both those personas play not to lose. Now let's flip to this other side of the scarcity coin called play to win. And play to win, it happens with a striver who plays a game called status. They think they can just work harder to make more money, but they inevitably burn out. And then, the striver, they love to show what they've accomplished and they really want to accomplish it, right? They're willing to work for that. The high roller, they play a game called opportunity, and they're likely to end up and down and maybe even bankrupt because they take on too much risk. They're fine raising funds. They're fine taking pictures in front of a house that's not theirs or renting, a car and pretending it's theirs. Like, I call that the financial pick. You have to be post pictures like that. You know what I'm saying? But that's kind of the high roller playing the game opportunity. So the difference between the striver and high roller is they both play to win, but the striver wants to earn it, where the high roller just wants to have it. They don't care whether it was earned or whether they inherited it or whether they, sometimes even cheated their way there for some of them. Not, this is just kind of the shadow side. And the shadow side usually happens when we focus from scarcity. It's in isolation and competition. It's in effort and struggle. And it usually is a very myopic view that doesn't add the most value to the world. I don't use the word retirement. I use the word financial independence. And that frames it completely differently. Because retirement's something at age 55, 65, or something like that, and that you're working towards in the future. And what's unfortunate about it is most people neglect the very things that are important when you get to retirement in their preparation. So they're trying to build a nest egg, never creating cash flow with that nest egg, and now when they retire, they've got to create cash flow from that nest egg. So they're ill-prepared, ill-equipped, because it's an improper methodology. So on the other hand, financial independence says, well, what if you have enough cash flow from either your main assets or your entrepreneurial assets, because a business could be that, right? And the three main ones are usually real estate, business, or intellectual property that people create cash flow with. Yes, you can get stocks that pay dividends and you can get treasuries that pay interest, but typically if you want to get there quicker, it comes from real estate, IP, or business. Not all three. If you try to do all of it, you're going to spread yourself thin, and that's where some people, take far too much risk because it's not aligned with their investor DNA. Your investor DNA is who you are as an investor. Invest in your skill set so you become a better investor versus taking risk. So if you think financial independence, have enough recurring revenue from your assets to cover your basic expenses, now you're financially independent. You have choice in the matter every day. You have freedom of choice, what you want to do, what you don't want to do, because that income's coming in. Now, it might require some maintenance and management. You might have to monitor it along the way. But even if you have to monitor it, you kind of have that freedom of, You could take a week and it's not a big deal, or you could take a summer and it would still exist. Just have mini retirements or mini trips along the way coming back into the world of value creation. My biggest concern about retirement is people retire from value creation so they're no longer in charge of the outcome of their income. And I just find when people lose that purpose, it's not a fulfilling moment unless you worked in the assembly lines and in blue collar jobs that beat your body down, that aren't meant to do for 50 years. But what if you started to discover a career that's consistent with who you are, and maybe even invent it as an entrepreneur if it doesn't already exist? And if you have economic independence, you have the freedom to start doing that. So I believe in create economic independence as soon as possible and then never retire. I feel like the FIRE movement, first off, what I do like about it is the minimalism thinking, that we're not our stuff and not getting so caught up in consumerism that it overtakes our life. I like that. What I dislike is it minimizes value creation. Okay, you're 45 years old. What if you live to 100 years old? You're going to spend more than half of your life in retirement, with inflation attacking you, with taxes being looming and being a concern, and interest rates fluctuating. So you're going to let an economy start dictating your life because you're going to be even more beholden to it than if you own a business. See, in a business, economies change, and we just listen to our customers and we serve them during a time where they need more help. Like my businesses grew a lot in 2009 and in 2002 and in 2020 because people were more willing to listen about what we're talking about here. So if you could stop thinking about retirement from purpose, from value creation, or from vision, and think about retirement as something that you start eliminating the things that you hate doing along the way, and create a vision compelling enough for your life, and then enjoy life along the way, that's a new definition of retirement. And maybe that wasn't available back in the industrial age. That's the thing. Maybe we still have this like lingering belief system that came from a different time. But in a time of, transformation and technology and artificial intelligence, I think that it could make sense that we stay engaged. Like for me, what I love most about my business is I do these immersions one-on-one. I become friends with everyone. We get to a place of like real human connection because we're talking in a very vulnerable way. I'm finding out about what their obstacles and opportunities are, what their fears are, the things they've never shared with another person, helping them overcome that, live a better life, design a game they love and in life that they love. Like, why would I want to stop doing that? That's like so much fun. Now, if I was back in the days of peddling life insurance when I was early on in my career, meeting one-on-one, talking about insurance, I would want to retire from that. That's not what I love to do and who I am. So a lot of it is I think we just get stuck in this is what I have to do, this is what I'm good at, this is what I know, and it gets mundane and boring. So we're like, oh, how can we get to the other side of that? And that's why sacrifice is one of the main culprits of lowering people's wealth, is because we keep doing things we hate to do things we love one day, someday, when we might be too old to do them. So there's the old way of thinking, what I would call the old portfolio. Okay, and the old portfolio starts with, we just put our money in banks, and they say things like, oh, you should have 3 to 6 months of savings. That's an insane thought. 3 or 6 months, that's 100%, that's 100% different. Like, it just shows that people aren't being paid to get people to get liquidity, so they have less thinking about it. I believe we want to have years of liquidity ultimately, because it gives us a lot of freedom of choice and also lets us capitalize on opportunities when they come because we have enough cash set aside. But we don't probably want to sit in the banks. Old portfolio says you're going to earn a little bit of interest at the bank. Then it says, you know what? In the center of this is the portfolio thought process. And the portfolio thought process for most people is asset allocation from 3 major assets: stocks, bonds, and REITs, like real estate investment trusts. But none of it's stuff that you touch or that you know about. It's always reliant upon someone outside. So really the tenets of that, of the stocks, bonds, and REITs are, it takes money to make money. So it's always about how much money you put away. High risk equals high return. So they're telling you to take risk in order to get return. Even though you're asset allocating to minimize some of the risks, still you got to be heavy in stocks, and so people get further away from control of their money, and they have a lot of fear around it. And then you're in it for the long haul. So they just wait for long periods of time as they funnel money in here without creating cash flow. Now, what they're also told, with this is a little bit more of my what would the Rockefellers do stuff with the Rockefeller method, is, hey, look, insurance is expensive, so buy term insurance, and then you're going to have enough money in the future that you could get rid of that term insurance. But and I promise you, you're going to have an attorney one day come in your life and say, you've really done a great job, good job. You have millions of dollars you're going to owe in tax when you die. And if you don't do anything about it, that's just going to go to the government. Would you like to address that tax issue? And most people go yes. So even though the financial person said buy term, invest the difference in that portfolio, the attorney says buy an insurance policy that's permanent now when you're older and it's more expensive. That's the old portfolio, and that's the struggle. And there's a lot of lies in that struggle. Hey, you can live off 70% of your pre-retirement income. Really? Look at what happened the last 3 years. Inflation was monstrous, so that wasn't really good. And why would we plan to have less money in the future than we have today, right? Then if interest rates go down, so does our income. If taxes go up, so does our income. If inflation's worse than we think, we start losing our purchasing power. So that old portfolio is what most people think about. And that portfolio is mostly mutual funds and REITs and fund managers. And, there's $22 trillion inside of mutual funds throughout the world. That's massive. Yet there's minimal accountability. What's the actual fee structure? What's the performance? What are those fees costing you? What kind of trading's happening? How good are those trades? How are they doing against index funds? That's the problem. Let me tell you the new portfolio because I think it speaks to who you are. Instead of using banks, I just use where banks put their money. Banks put a third of their reserves in high cash value insurance, but specific types of insurance that get tax advantages, have contractual guarantees, and you can access your money before 59 and a half. The new portfolio is you are the portfolio. You're the portfolio. So that portfolio is either intellectual property, real estate that you could touch and benefit from and walk to or drive to or see, and then businesses. And it's a more active portfolio. So instead of investing in other people's companies you know nothing about, you invest in your own company. And you invest in yourself to increase your skill sets in one of those three areas. So I have a cabin that I host my immersions at that provides, my business pays for the cabin's use. We love it as a family. I'm building a music studio at my other place that I bought. Walking distance from there, up in the woods, right on the river. The real estate that I have here, like I used to have 100+ properties. Now I just have real estate that I personally benefit from, that I know the areas, that I'm related to the areas, and I've done well because of that before I got spread too thin. Intellectual property. I've written 9 books. I have a 10th in a manuscript. I've got video courses. I'm filming new video courses. Like intellectual property. I've licensed intellectual property to financial advisors. So I look at my theatrical keynote, my comedy special. Those are all part of the assets of the new portfolio, right? Intellectual property. So instead of thinking of stocks and bonds, you have insurance instead of bonds and savings. And then you have assets that you actually created that can create recurring revenue. And you learn how to market them, you learn how to add value with them, and then you don't have to go buy something in the future because you already have that death benefit that kind of came along for the ride, and you can use that cash to benefit. Like my book, Money on Mass, was 350 grand to do all the design, do all the printing of the books, because I did a co-publisher, so I could do distribution through any, Barnes & Noble, or I could do distribution through my own self and just keep all the margin above the book. So I decided to front all of it so I have more back end because it's my investment, and I look at it as a portfolio. So old portfolio versus new portfolio, it's a completely different methodology and mindset, and I think it also dispels retirement because a new portfolio, design the portfolio you want, the game worth playing. Design it where you enjoy the work. And if you don't like writing books, don't write books. If you do, then write books. If you like filming courses, film courses. If you don't film courses. If you like doing, I call that our intellectual property DNA. It's taken me years to figure out what that is for me. I used to do stuff because that's what everybody said I should do, not because of what I want to do. Now I do it because I love doing it, and it happens to benefit people as well. It's kind of interesting if we think about the process. Why do we not do that? Well, one, there's a lot of fear that people have to invest in themselves and to choose themselves versus just handing money over. And so if we go, well, I'm not as smart as someone that graduated from this Ivy League school, but we have to look at some of the people in money are not value creators, they're value extractors. They can tell a good story. We take risks, they get the return. They get fees whether we make money or not. They tell us to be in it for the long haul. They create cash flow along the way, right? They're playing by a different set of rules. And so maybe they could beat us on tests and on verbiage and sound really intelligent. But the question is, are they adding more money to our lives compared to the money we could add to our own lives if we invest in ourselves? And what I think is it takes more time to develop ourselves. It's going to be a longer path because, writing a book, there was money that goes into it. There's editors, there's all this, and then learning how to market it. Like, my book came out in 2008. But by 2010, that book had changed my life with the relationships I had built and the people that I had met and the way that we could connect. But it took longer than just putting my money in an account and seeing the money in the account. I invested over $500,000 in killing sacred cows, full page ads in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and cover of Publisher Weekly and hiring PR firms and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, oh, that was hefty. It was a lot at that time in my life. And especially the timing of it being a recession that was coming on. But then I watch and, I'm not getting huge checks, but I think I got a $5,500 check off of the ebook sales for the last 90 days. Here we are, 15 years later, and I'm still building relationships with people because of that book, and people are buying money en masse because of that book. So sometimes it just takes longer for that momentum to happen. It isn't as immediate gratification financially, but it's more immediate gratification because we're doing work that's worth doing and we're investing in ourselves. But we just have to overcome that fear, because here's what I'm going to tell you. You will make mistakes. It's part of the process. There will be times where it's difficult, but keep your vision bigger than your problems and you'll make it through. Be willing to ask for support, being willing to tell people what's actually going on, be willing to answer the tough questions, be willing to make course corrections over time. And you're going to find, yes, it requires a bigger investment of time than just handing your money over, but it's investments that will pay dividends long term because you become a better human. You write your book and you learn while you're writing. I write my books and I experience the very things I write about at the deepest possible level. And I feel like the universe almost tests me on it. And it's like, oh, that's what that means. But now I have a way to connect with people. I mean, there's some people read my book, they know me so well before I've ever talked to them that it feels like we've known each other for years. Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from, so go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.